So after all that, after all the chaos, the Georgia Bulldogs are headed back to Atlanta to play for an SEC championship. They will play the winner of Texas and Texas A&M. What do we think about this? What do we think about Georgia, and do they need to win the SEC to make the college football playoff? We'll talk about all that right now. Make sure you're dialed in right here. Best way to be dialed in if you're a Georgia Bulldog fan, if you're a college football sicko, is by being subscribed. We appreciate y'all in advance for that. Also, follow me on the socials, Instagram, Twitter, at JD PicKell. A great way for us to interact outside of this whole comment section. So thank you for that. So, as I just mentioned, a lot of chaos. There was like a million different scenarios and tiebreakers and things that could have broken a certain way. Ross Dellinger was where I saw this information first. He tweets out, these are how the conference title games are going to shake out in terms of who's already clinched a berth and who they could potentially see there. Again, Georgia, they have clinched their spot in Atlanta. Yet again, they will play the winner of Texas versus Texas A&M. Now, if you're Georgia, the way that you handled Texas in Austin probably inspires some confidence, neither here nor there. Here's the one thing I want to get out ahead of, because Lane Kiffin said this, I believe it was going into this past week, where he's like, hey, listen, I've talked to some coaches in the SEC. Do we really want to play in the SEC title game? It's a chance to get bounced if we lose, and from the playoff discussion that is, and get hurt and all that. And I'm just telling you this, Kirby Smart, man, gold medal mentality. I promise you, Kirby Smart, if there's a trophy, if there's anything on the line for us to play for, we want to win. Pretty straightforward. He is Michael Jordan. He is Michael Phelps. He is Tiger Woods. That's how he's wired. He's not thinking about, well, maybe, just maybe, if we can avoid the SEC title game and give ourselves a better chance in the playoff. That's not how this dude is wired. They want to win the SEC. That was on their list of goals to start the year. That is how they feel going into this thing. That is the way they operate. They're not thinking about load management, if you will. So now we talk about Georgia here going forward. I think this is the dangerous version of Georgia that we alluded to at the beginning of the year. Not that they've won every game, not that they're playing their overall best football right now that you could point to the Tennessee game and maybe have that conversation. I think they're in regardless, quite frankly, of if they win or lose the SEC championship game. We'll talk more about that in a second. But I think for Georgia now, they have shown they play their best football in one-game seasons. And so in a lot of ways, you could point to the idea of, well, if you don't win the SEC, maybe the discussion opens up for some folks about, having a chance to throw stones and keep Georgia out of the college football playoff. Again, that would be a little bit crazy to me, but that discussion, if you're Kirby Smart, maybe you turn the volume up on that a little bit going into this week and tell your guys, hey, listen, one-game season, this is one of our goals from the preseason, go win the SEC, all that, so that dials up the intensity a little bit. So if you win, obviously, you're in. That's how this whole thing works, right? If you win, Kirby Smart then gets 24 days to get his team healthy and to prep for whoever the poor unsuspecting soul is that has to play them in the second round of the college football playoff. So that's advantage Georgia. Again, one-game season mentality kind of deal with them being in the college football playoff. Now, if they lose the SEC championship game, again, I still think they're in, but going back to what we said about Georgia and how good they are with their back against the wall. Look at Georgia in the games where you would talk about them being in hunting mode, if you will, to use Kirby Smart terminology. They lose to Bama. The next high-stakes hunting mode kind of game for them, they go to Texas. We all saw what happened there. Carson Beck didn't even play his best game. Played far from his best game. Played one of his worst games, actually, throwing 3 interceptions. And Georgia won that game by 2 scores. They lose to Ole Miss. And I said it very, very clearly. I was like, listen, Ole Miss won that game because they had better players than Georgia. This Georgia team, they've got some issues. They got to bring it against Tennessee. They beat the brakes off Tennessee. So with Georgia having their back against the wall, whether they win the SEC or lose the SEC, I'm telling you now, with them being in the playoff kind of setting here, whether it be the SEC title game or the actual college football playoff in itself, this is where Kirby Smart makes you pay. This is where Kirby Smart, I think, is extra dangerous. There is nobody in the sport right now, I believe, that is better than Kirby Smart in a one-game season getting his team to play their best football when it matters the most. And that is what they have in front of them right now. Now, there's going to be some pushback here on what I said earlier of, hey, Georgia can lose this game and still be in the college football playoff. Because at that point, in this hypothetical Georgia, assuming they win next week against Georgia Tech, they would be a 10-3 football team. So some people are going to say, well, hey, 3 losses? The games have to matter at some point, right? Yeah, the games do have to matter at some point. And Georgia has won in this discussion 10 of those games in the toughest conference in college football. And I think when we try to comp Georgia to other conferences and what they do in the SEC versus what your school does in the ACC or the Big 12, like, to me, Georgia is still like a rotational player for Team USA. Like, maybe they're not, getting into the college football playoff with a bye if they lose the SEC, obviously, but like they're still cooking whoever that is from Lithuania or Serbia that's in that starting five that won their conference, right? Like, let's not pretend that Georgia isn't still one of the most talented teams in college football. And the pushback will be, again, games have to matter. If we're just going to live in hypotheticals, why even play the games? We're not living hypotheticals. Georgia has proven now they're a really good freaking football team. When they beat Texas, when they beat Tennessee, when they beat Clemson to start the year, like, they have a body of work now that speaks for itself. So just because we can't drop Georgia into the Big 12 and give them that schedule and have them run the conference there, or go win the ACC and run the conference there, because we don't have those actual tangible, on-field results we can point to, doesn't mean that we can't still use our eyes, use our common sense and say, yeah, Georgia, all the NFL players they have, who they have a head coach, it's fair to assume that they're going to be a wagon when it comes to the college football playoff. It's fair to assume them making the SEC championship game, they should be one of those best 12 teams in that whole discussion. So I can't wait to watch this play out. Again, after all the madness that 2024 has been, the team that was favored to win the SEC to start the year, the team that was favored to win the national championship to start the year, headed back to Atlanta. And again, a one-game season, a one-game back against the wall kind of spot for a Kirby Smart team, going to be very difficult to pick against them. So we'll have a pick for you, actually, when that game does get here during conference title weekend. But make sure you're locked in. Make sure you're subscribed. Let me know your thoughts on Georgia as it pertains to the SEC title game and their college football playoff aspirations. Appreciate y'all. Love y'all. Going to keep this party rolling. We will see y'all next time.